Ever looked at someone and thought, just another customer, nothing special? Maybe their shoes were scuffed, maybe their suitcase looked worn, maybe they walked in without the kind of presence that turns heads. So you brush past them, dismiss them, don't offer your best smile. After all, they don't look important. And yet, hours later, days later, you learn the truth. That quiet man, that unassuming woman, they weren't just anyone. They were someone powerful, someone who could have changed your life, if only you'd seen beyond the surface. This isn't just a story about a mistake. It's one of those life-altering stings that creeps back into your chest at 3 a.m., eyes wide open, heart pounding, whispering, "How did I let that happen?" It's the kind of memory that refuses to fade, that replays itself over and over with new meanings each time. Not because you didn't know, but because you didn't look. You didn't care, until it was far, far too late. It began on a day so ordinary, so beautifully uneventful, that no one could have predicted the chaos it would later unravel. The sun poured through the wide glass windows of the modest but proud Grand Savannah Hotel, where ceiling fans turned with lazy determination. The scent of citrus floor polish danced with the subtle aroma of cardamom tea, and the occasional clicking of laptop keys added a modern rhythm to the room. The lobby buzzed gently with the sounds of a few guests, each absorbed in their own bubble. Some scrolling, some sipping, some simply staring into space. It was peaceful, predictable. Behind the reception desk stood Damien, immaculate, poised, and running on a cocktail of caffeine and pride. His neatly gelled hair hadn't moved in hours. His navy shirt, ironed so crisp it could cut paper, hugged his torso like armor. And his name tag? Damien Carter, General Manager. He wore it like a sheriff's badge, a symbol of his reign over his little kingdom. Damien prided himself on instincts. One glance, and you could categorize a guest before they even spoke. Business or backpacker. Polite or problem. Worth attention or not. So when the front door chimed, and in stepped a man with dust on his shoes and creases in his linen clothes, Damien didn't need a second look. To him, the man screamed, budget guest. No reservation, no class. Probably passing through. He carried a modest duffel, not even a suitcase, and wore a cap pulled low, shadowing his face in a way Damien found vaguely suspicious. The man's eyes swept the lobby, then approached the counter slowly. There was a stillness about him. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that absorbs everything. Observant, quiet, calm. "Good afternoon," he said softly. Voice calm, but unmistakably deep.
Damien barely looked up. He was already annoyed. There was a VIP check-in scheduled within the hour. A French diplomat and his entourage. Damien needed everything perfect for that. He didn't have time for walk-ins who wouldn't even stay the night. "Yes," Damien responded, curt and clipped. "I'd like to book a room," the man said. "Just for the night." Damien glanced over him again. No luggage tag, no assistant, no credit card in hand, no name offered up front. Everything about this guest screamed inconvenience. Damien's lips tightened. He tapped at the keyboard with exaggerated speed. "We're fully booked," he lied. "There's a lodge 2 blocks down that might have vacancies." The man didn't flinch. He nodded slowly, then simply asked, "Fully booked, are you sure?" Damien didn't answer. He had already shifted his attention to a clipboard. He had done his job. Dismiss, redirect, forget. The man stood there a moment longer. Not pleading, not angry, just still, watching. Then he nodded, tipped his cap, and walked out into the late afternoon heat. And just like that, Damien forgot about him. He returned to preparing for the VIP. He checked the room setup, adjusted the fruit bowl, barked orders at staff, micromanaged the floral arrangements. Perfection mattered when the elite arrived. An hour later, the sirens began, but not the kind you hear in the streets. These were quiet sirens, whispers from the bellboy, panic in the concierge's eyes, the flurry of phones lighting up behind the counter. Something was wrong. Something big. The French diplomat hadn't shown up. Instead, 3 black SUVs rolled in, flanked by security agents dressed not in suits but in military attire. bearing a crest Damien didn't recognize immediately. A woman from housekeeping dropped her mop when she saw the flags on the cars. "Is that Burkina Faso?" someone muttered. Damien blinked. Burkina Faso? The name stirred something, but before he could connect the dots, the main lobby doors swung open again, and in walked the man. The man. Same worn duffel bag, same linen shirt. No cap this time. His face, calm, unreadable, was fully visible now, and behind him, a wall of armed guards. "President Ibrahim Traoré," a voice boomed as one of the guards stepped forward, requesting meeting space and accommodations for the delegation. Damien's throat went dry. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. The ordinary guest he had thrown out? He was the president of Burkina Faso. The room froze. The silence was brutal. The bellboy looked like he was going to faint. A guest with earbuds slowly pulled them out. Every pair of eyes turned toward Damien. The president didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He merely looked at Damien with eyes that held the weight of nations. Then he said in the same calm tone as before, "I was told there were no rooms available." The dagger in Damien's chest twisted. His breath caught in his throat. He wanted to apologize, to beg, but the words wouldn't come. President Traoré turned to one of his aides and spoke something in his native tongue. The aide nodded and walked off. The hotel lobby, once proud and polished, suddenly felt like a stage drenched in shame. Within minutes, the hotel's reputation unraveled. Phones rang off the hook. A local journalist who had been tipped off arrived with a camera. The footage spread like wildfire. Hashtag I stand with Burkina. Hashtag Ibrahim Traoré. Hashtag dignity in power. Videos of the entrance, the salute, the moment Damien's face dropped, they all went viral. That night, President Traoré stayed, but not at the Grand Savannah. He chose a smaller, locally owned guest house across the street, a place with fewer stars but more humility. By morning, the fallout began. Guests canceled bookings, staff whispered behind Damien's back, the board called an emergency meeting. And Damien? He sat alone in his office, head in hands, heart pounding with that one unrelenting question. How did I not see? The truth was he hadn't looked. And now, no matter how many times he rewound the memory, begged for a second chance in his mind, there was no pause button, no undo, only the bitter taste of regret. And the world? The world remembered. In walked a man, tall, calm, and at first glance utterly forgettable. His presence was the kind that blended into background noise, the faded fabric of his wrinkled shirt, the dust lining the soles of his shoes, the absence of luggage or escort. No car keys jingling in his hand, no rolling suitcase behind him, just a man, and yet not just any man. He moved with a quiet assurance, the kind that didn't demand attention, but somehow owned the space he entered. He approached the reception desk, paused just long enough to make eye contact, and offered a polite nod. "Good afternoon. I'd like a room for the night, please." Damien didn't even lift his head all the way. His trained eyes flicked over the man in a fraction of a second, scanning for the usual markers. No Rolex, no luxury brand stitched into the collar, no visible security detail. His internal radar didn't ping with importance, just another body walking through his polished lobby. He gave a perfunctory smile, the kind that didn't reach the eyes. "May I ask the purpose of your visit, sir?" His voice was cool, professional, a bit too polished, like a blade sharpened a little too often. The man's response was measured, almost too calm. "Just passing through. A few meetings tomorrow. I need a place to rest." There was something unusual about the way he spoke. Unhurried, deliberate, as if the world moved for him, not the other way around. A quiet authority in his tone, not forced, not loud, but Damien didn't notice, or chose not to. The dagger in Damien's chest twisted. His breath caught in his throat. He wanted to apologize, to beg, but the words wouldn't come. President Traoré turned to one of his aides and spoke something in his native tongue. The aide nodded and walked off. The hotel lobby, once proud and polished, suddenly felt like a stage drenched in shame. Within minutes, the hotel's reputation unraveled. Phones rang off the hook. A local journalist who had been tipped off arrived with a camera. The footage spread like wildfire.
Hashtag I stand with Burkina. Hashtag Ibrahim Traoré. Hashtag dignity in power. Videos of the entrance, the salute, the moment Damien's face dropped, they all went viral. That night, President Traoré stayed, but not at the Grand Savannah. He chose a smaller, locally owned guest house across the street, a place with fewer stars but more humility. By morning, the fallout began. Guests canceled bookings, staff whispered behind Damien's back, the board called an emergency meeting. And Damien? He sat alone in his office, head in hands, heart pounding with that one unrelenting question: how did I not see? The truth was he hadn't looked. And now, no matter how many times he rewound the memory, begged for a second chance in his mind, there was no pause button, no undo, only the bitter taste of regret. And the world? The world remembered. In walked a man, tall, calm, and at first glance utterly forgettable. His presence was the kind that blended into background noise, the faded fabric of his wrinkled shirt, the dust lining the soles of his shoes, the absence of luggage or escort. No car keys jingling in his hand, no rolling suitcase behind him, just a man. And yet not just any man. He moved with a quiet assurance, the kind that didn't demand attention, but somehow owned the space he entered. He approached the reception desk, paused just long enough to make eye contact, and offered a polite nod. "Good afternoon. I'd like a room for the night, please." Damien didn't even lift his head all the way. His trained eyes flicked over the man in a fraction of a second, scanning for the usual markers. No Rolex, no luxury brand stitched into the collar, no visible security detail. His internal radar didn't ping with importance, just another body walking through his polished lobby. He gave a perfunctory smile, the kind that didn't reach the eyes. "May I ask the purpose of your visit, sir?" His voice was cool, professional, a bit too polished, like a blade sharpened a little too often. The man's response was measured, almost too calm. "Just passing through. A few meetings tomorrow. I need a place to rest." There was something unusual about the way he spoke, unhurried, deliberate, as if the world moved for him, not the other way around. A quiet authority in his tone, not forced, not loud, but Damien didn't notice, or chose not to. Damien's stomach turned ice cold. The screen was still glowing as Lena tapped another image, security footage from the hotel's own front cameras. It was him. Him! The same man Damien had just denied. No reservation, no luggage, no suits, just power, cloaked in humility. A deep, suffocating silence swallowed the space between them. The buzz of the ceiling fans now sounded like alarms. Damien's lips parted as if to say something, anything, but no words came. Just the hollow realization of what he had done. The front doors swung open again. This time, the sound wasn't a soft chime. It was the heavy stomp of boots. The guards entered first, their expressions unreadable. Then came President Traoré, without a change in expression. Not angry, not smug, simply present. And Damien? He could barely breathe. Before Lena could even finish her warning, the soft hum of the street outside gave way to the unmistakable sound of power. Two sleek, black SUVs pulling up to the front of the hotel with the slow, deliberate authority that said they weren't here for a casual stay. Government plates gleamed under the sunlight, and the doors opened in perfect synchronization. Out stepped men in dark military uniforms, polished boots hitting the pavement with precision. Their movements were sharp, silent, and disciplined. Even before they entered the lobby, a wave of tension rolled through the air, as if the building itself sensed something had shifted. Damien, still at the desk, instinctively straightened his back. His hand hovered near his tie, adjusting it as his eyes flicked toward the door. Something was wrong. These weren't ordinary guests. This wasn't a routine visit. His throat tightened. One of the officers stepped forward, tall, unreadable. He approached the desk with calm purpose, a tablet in one hand. His voice was clear, unwavering. "Good afternoon. We're here looking for a man who entered this hotel less than 20 minutes ago. Name, Ibrahim Traoré." Lena's breath caught audibly. Her hand flew to her mouth. Damien frowned, trying to mask the unease creeping into his face. "I'm sorry, who?" he asked, though he already knew this wasn't going to end well. The officer, without a word, turned the tablet around. On the screen was a frozen image, grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. The security camera's angle captured the man standing at the reception desk. Dusty shoes, wrinkled shirt, face calm, eyes steady. It was him. The same man Damien had dismissed like an inconvenience. "That's him," the officer said with cool precision. "President Ibrahim Traoré. He's traveling incognito. No press, no motorcade, no formal security. He prefers it that way. Quiet. Observing how he's treated when nobody knows who he is."
News anchors dissected the story. Activists shared it as a lesson. Influencers weighed in on classism, power perception, and humility. The video didn't show rage or confrontation. It showed grace in the face of disregard. And that made it even more powerful. People around the world didn't just react. They felt. The story wasn't just about a mistake. It was about how easy it is to miss greatness when it doesn't wear a crown. Meanwhile, inside the hotel, the walls that had once held pride now echoed with shame. Staff whispered in corners. Guests side-eyed Damien when they passed him in the hallway. His name, once confidently displayed on his name tag, suddenly felt like a scarlet letter. And President Traoré? He didn't return with anger. He returned with quiet dignity. He met with his delegation in a different venue, a modest guest house nearby, that had welcomed him without judgment. He dined with local leaders, shook hands with business owners, and posed for pictures with children who had lined up outside, hoping to meet the hero president they'd seen online. That night, as Damien sat alone in his office, the once familiar lobby now felt alien. Each knock on the door made him flinch. Each whisper outside made his gut twist. His phone buzzed. It was a message from corporate. "Emergency board meeting, tomorrow. Be ready to explain." He didn't sleep, because no matter how many apologies he rehearsed, no matter how many statements he could draft, one truth remained. He hadn't just failed to recognize power, he had failed to recognize character. Clips circulated like wildfire. Grainy security footage turned into a global spectacle. There he was, President Ibrahim Traoré, standing with the composure of a monk and the bearing of a man who'd faced far worse than rejection. Viewers couldn't look away from the subtle details. The way he stood tall despite being turned away, the quiet dignity in his voice, the unwavering patience in his eyes. No entourage, no entitlement, no flash of ego. It wasn't just what happened that stirred people. It was how he responded, with grace, with restraint, with an almost painful calm. And that's what made the world angry. Not simply because a president had been disrespected, but because he hadn't fought back. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't reminded anyone of who he was. He just accepted the slight, nodded politely, and walked away. That silence, it screamed louder than any protest ever could. Screens everywhere replayed the same moment. Damien's face during the interaction, his blank stare, the barely concealed impatience, the smug, automatic tone of someone certain they were dealing with a nobody. Every micro-expression dissected, every second analyzed. The internet didn't miss a beat. Memes erupted, commentary exploded, and the world drew its own conclusion. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a moment of failure, human failure, broadcast for all to see. That night, long after the buzz had reached its peak, President Traoré finally broke his silence. Not with a press conference, not with legal threats or official complaints, just one sentence, posted on his official social media account. Plain white text on a black background. "I did not take offense, but I did take note." 7 words. Yet they echoed louder than speeches. They hit harder than condemnation. Political commentators reposted it with stunned admiration. Human rights activists shared it as a modern parable. Celebrities quoted it. World leaders, even those who opposed him, retweeted it with silent respect. The statement was dissected in newsrooms, printed on protest banners, and turned into profile pictures. And what shook everyone the most was the absence of fury. No finger pointing,
No demands. Just dignified disappointment. Because disappointment from a man like Ibrahim Traoré stung deeper than rage. Back at the Grand Savannah Hotel, inside a once pristine office, now soaked in sweat and silence, Damien sat alone. His crisp shirt, now crumpled and damp against his back, clung to him like guilt. The small fan overhead creaked as it spun, useless against the heavy air. His computer screen glowed faintly in the dimness, the same video looping again and again. The handshake, the thank you, the smile, his own cold, dismissive response. Each time he watched it, it cut deeper. Damien wasn't just haunted by what he'd done. He was haunted by how easily he'd done it. He hadn't raised his voice or broken a rule, but he had failed in something far more fundamental: his duty to treat every human being with dignity. He hadn't seen a president, but more damningly, he hadn't seen a person. He had looked at dust on shoes and drawn a conclusion. He had seen wrinkles in a shirt and decided worth. He had heard a soft voice and mistaken it for insignificance. And in doing so, he had dismissed a man who had led a revolution, who had walked through fire for justice, who had buried comrades and still chosen compassion. A man who had seen war up close, yet carried peace in his voice. As the days passed, the story only grew. It ceased being just about a hotel in West Africa. It became the conversation. Across continents, people opened up. Social media feeds flooded with painful, personal stories, accounts from ordinary people recalling moments they were overlooked, ignored, treated like background noise, simply because they didn't look important. A woman in Singapore wrote of being refused service until her husband arrived in a tailored suit. A man in New York shared how he was mistaken for staff at his own event. A girl in Nairobi posted about being called just a child. And yet, through all of it, President Traoré said nothing more. No demands, no fiery declarations, no attempts to salvage image or reputation. He simply continued with his agenda, meeting with community leaders, visiting schools, reviewing regional infrastructure. Every move deliberate, every word thoughtful. He stayed in a modest guest house, whose owner later told reporters, "He thanked me. Can you imagine? The president thanked me for treating him like a man." And that's what people remembered. Not the mistake, not the outrage, but the response. He didn't need flashing lights or a throne to command respect. He walked through the world as himself, quiet, strong, humble. And in doing so, he exposed something deeper, that too often we reserve our best manners for those we think are powerful. But true greatness? It never asks to be seen. It never wears labels. It simply is. And the world, this time, did see. And the world did not forget. Damien tried to make amends. He scrambled to repair the damage, not just to the hotel's reputation, but to something far deeper, his own conscience. Within 24 hours of the media storm, he issued a formal public apology. It was carefully written, vetted by legal advisors, but the shame in his voice during the video was unmistakably real. He didn't hide behind a corporate spokesperson. He stood in front of the camera himself, eyes sunken, voice hoarse, and said the words millions were waiting to hear. I was wrong. He pledged donations to youth education initiatives in Burkina Faso. He sponsored scholarships under Traoré's name. He even paid for large white billboards on city highways that simply read, "We will do better." He wasn't trying to erase the mistake. He knew he couldn't. He just wanted to prove he'd understood. Inside the Grand Savannah Hotel, sweeping changes took place. Damien mandated intensive staff training on unconscious bias. Every employee, from bellboys to senior managers, attended sessions on empathy, respect, and humility. The staff lounge was updated with a new slogan pinned to the wall in bold letters. Every guest, every time, worthy of dignity. Still, none of it could undo that single moment. The footage lived forever online. The image of the president offering a gentle handshake and being quietly turned away by a man who didn't bother to look up. That 30-second clip had already entered history. It had become part of a larger conversation about class, race, and perception. No apology, no donation, no rebranding campaign could erase it. And Damien knew that. In the weeks that followed, the hotel's bookings began to drop. Locals, once proud of the hotel's presence in their community, began to look at it with disdain. Students used it as a cautionary tale in ethics classes. Families whispered about that place as they passed by. And Damien, once the polished, confident face of the Grand Savannah, stopped wearing his name tag altogether. It had become a symbol of failure. But something in him had shifted. He no longer stood behind the desk like a judge watching over a courtroom. Instead, he began greeting guests personally, whether they arrived in a suit or sandals. He made eye contact, not to scan or size up, but to truly see. He asked questions, not to verify status, but to connect. He spoke less and listened more. His tone softened, his pace slowed. He remembered names, noticed small details, offered kindness before it was asked for. He had become a different man. But that transformation came at a steep, bitter cost. And yet, life moved on, as it always does. One gray afternoon, months later, as a soft rain drummed on the windows and the lobby sat unusually quiet, the front door chimed gently. Damien was standing at the counter, not as a manager but simply as a host. He looked up. A man entered. Simple clothes, canvas shoes, a faded backpack slung over one shoulder. He shook the rain from his sleeves and approached the counter. For a single heartbeat, Damien's chest tightened. His breath caught. Was it him? But as the man stepped closer, Damien saw that it wasn't. A stranger, another traveler, just passing through. Still, Damien smiled, warmly, genuinely, with a softness that hadn't existed in him a year ago. "Welcome," he said, voice steady. "How can I help you today?" Because now, Damien no longer waited for someone to look important before treating them with importance. He no longer let appearances dictate his behavior. He had learned something that had cost him deeply, something that could never be unlearned, that greatness doesn't always announce itself with trumpets or titles. Sometimes it arrives wearing dusty shoes and a quiet voice. Sometimes it asks for nothing and expects even less. Sometimes it walks in like a whisper, soft, humble, easily overlooked, and leaves without complaint. But its impact? That lingers. And if you're not watching, not really watching, you'll miss it. You'll miss something extraordinary, disguised as ordinary. You'll fail to recognize greatness until it's gone, and by then, it's too late. Damien would never forget that lesson, because the cost of kindness is nothing. But the regret of withholding it? That stays with you forever.